Well, thank you all for joining today. Here's another Direct Connect with Archer. This is Mark Brahmstadt, Senior Vice President of Client Relationship here at Archer, with Nick Weber and Bryan Carr, both managing partners here at Archer. Hello, Nick. Hello, Bryan. How are you guys doing today?
Hey.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
It's a beautiful fall day, so we're enjoying it.
Still 90 degrees in fall.
We're still getting some extra summer here thanks to the smoke, but loving it.
Yeah, same here. It's pleasantly yellow outside thanks to the smoke, but hopefully we're moving past it relatively soon. Today we want to talk a little bit about preparing for an audit. I think you guys have had a little experience preparing your organizations and clients for audits.
Yeah, once or twice.
Even had some experience preparing for an audit as an auditor.
Very good. There you go. What makes a successful preparation?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah.
I think of all the audit preps we've done, I mean, various organizations, it's always different between organizations. But one of the biggest things is having the right people there and I always harp on this. I harped on the last Direct Connect, but it's like having the executive support, because if the right people aren't supporting it, it's not going to get traction. It's not going to get the people and the resources, necessary. But biggest thing is having the right people involved. A lot of times we see audit preps that go and it's specific to perhaps a regulatory compliance group, not the actual SMEs. There is some benefit to that from the mechanics of an audit and coordinating, but if you're going to really truly do an audit prep, at least in my view, one of the biggest things is having the right people involved.
I'd go even a step farther and say, you got to have the right people. The next thing is they've all got to have the same message. It seems pretty basic and simple, but I can't think of how many times I've seen where the rumor mill and the old telephone game, that not everybody's singing from the same sheet of music by the time we start pulling people together. So that's probably the biggest coordination. It's basic, simple blocking and tackling, but it gets overlooked a lot of times.
Yeah.
So do you see a difference whether it's a regulatory agency doing an audit versus internals or self audits?
In theory, the right answer is no. The real answer is yes. And I'd say going to when we do mock audits and work with clients, you have the auditor hat versus the coaching hat, and a lot of times they switch pretty frequently when it's the more internal versus when it's the audit. There is no. They may say they're taking their auditor hat off. It's sewn on. It's stitched in like Bryan's beard. It's woven through.
Yep. It's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. Yeah, Nick's absolutely right. Yeah, the best answer is yes, but certainly it can vary. We have had some audit prep engagements that are a little more focused on the logistical side of the audit of scheduling and planning out site visits and some of those things. Those can look and feel a little different. By and large, most of the audit prep we do is pretty similar in nature, where you're preparing the SMEs and all the group and getting everybody, singing from that same sheet of music. But yeah, certainly there can be some differences there, but we try and keep it, as consistent as possible.
Those audit preparations that you've been involved with, but would you agree that you've seen clients who that's really the first time they're taking up audit preparation is when they get notified of an audit versus maintaining audit readiness all year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And and a lot of times it hasn't been their fault necessarily. They may have had a lot of turnover, with a lot of their SMEs or other compliance folks, and so it really is their first time. But there's certainly plenty of entities that we've come into that, they'll wait until that notice of audit, to start really preparing, which in my opinion is way too late, way too late to make any kind of significant adjustments. At that point, it's how much glitter can we apply to what you have, to try and make it pass muster. Long story about the glitter, but the audit prep activity should start well in advance of your notice of audit.
Yeah, I'd echo that one. I think the strongest programs we've seen are where you have an annual review at a minimum. That was one of the things I was really fortunate I fell in on at my previous employer as the security manager was the annual self-certification we had to send off to WEC. Internally, we certified everything. So you had to go through all of your evidence. Your RSOs had to be updated, go through all your procedures. Any updates that need to be made had to be done. Usually we kick that process off first workday of the year in January, and it had to be done by the end of February. The last workday of February was kind of our requirement. So we had 2 months dedicated as much as you could. We still had our full-time jobs, but that made it really helpful. Honestly, a year and a half into that, when the compliance manager moved on to another position, and I ended up being the compliance manager 60 days before the WEC auditors rolled on site. That was the only reason I agreed to accept it. I put some conditions on it, but having that continuous check really set that up well, and allowed us to go through. Bryan brought his bag of glitter along on that one, but he didn't need to sprinkle a ton of it on there. But came through pretty clean.
Yep.
Even with that change, which I don't know of any utilities who've gone through that issue where they've had the compliance manager, compliance leadership change between that notice of audit and the actual audit. But I can't imagine anybody doing it better, just because of the way she had set it up. We were positioned for success. I know we've got other clients who set us up. We do mock audits in the past. We've done them every year, usually around this time of year. We'd come in and we'd mock audit, and it would be that continuous improvement. So the third one, when it was their actual audit, usually felt pretty easy. I think that's generally the way it was set up. There was the one after the audit was kind of a fix-it one. The middle one was they wanted us to be mean, the meanest auditors we can think of, which is no fun, except for sometimes when it's fun. And then prepping them for that audit so that their worst audit experience was their mock audit the year before their audit. We really put everybody through the meat grinder on that, and kind of the old, I think it was a patent thing that was a gallon of sweat saves an ounce of blood or something. I'm pretty sure I butchered that one. I don't have my wall to look at, but kind of taking that approach of making training harder than their hardest day ever. Those are the ones who are really prepared, and their audits are easy.
Yeah, very true. I think too, back to the timing aspect of it, the more time you can give yourself, the better. I mean, there's changes and adjustments that need to be made. You go through any exercise or any type of mock audit or gap assessment, whatever you want to call it. There's going to be action items that come out of that, and you want to give yourself time to make those adjustments, to make those changes or corrections, whatever it is, and get them implemented, prior to your notice of audit. As Nick mentioned, some clients were doing a gap assessment one year, we're doing a full mock audit the next year, and then come the third year, if they're on the 3-year cycle, we're there for audit support. But they're just that continuous improvement. And you catch different things at different times as audit approach changes. That's another X factor to it all, is what's the current audit approach and some of those requirements. It can shift a bit. So time is not your friend when it comes to the audit prep and waiting too long, because you really paint yourself into a corner and allow yourself no room to make any kind of course corrections or adjustments. So that's one big thing.
Honestly, there's a good moral on this one, is that you can be as prepared as you want for the audit and it still goes aside.
Yeah. We've lost our host on this. Mark was hanging on for dear life, but it looks like his internet connection isn't. So Nick and we'll bring this one home. But I talked about time. Time's not on your side if you're waiting too long. Even during an audit, you can see things go crazy. And hey, our host is back. Welcome back, Mark. We were just continuing on without you.
That's probably the best thing you could do right now.
All good. But even especially during the actual audit itself, I mean, there's so much. There's a lot of dynamics that go on, whether they're site visits, whether they're they're SME interviews, a lot of things that can affect kind of the tone and the progress of the audit as well. But one of the big things in audit prep, honestly, I think is one of the things I enjoy most. Nick alluded to it earlier about being the hardest auditor, practicing, harder than you play. That's a huge deal. Getting your SMEs in the room, actually letting us grill them and letting us, kind of turn the screws on and make them sweat a little bit and get uncomfortable in a safe situation. Because we all know SMEs, some of them really like to talk and other ones don't talk enough. And so there's quite a bit of magic that happens in those interviews, doing those mock audit interviews. That's honestly one of my favorites, because there's so many different ways it can go. And our job is to prepare you for as many scenarios as we can and make it as uncomfortable as we can so that it's not as bad, hopefully, during the audit. But yeah, there's always the one guy you can't get to stop talking. Those are the fun ones because they just keep going. So
those interviews and the exercises, that's a great chance in that audit prep to really figure out who you can put in front of the auditors and who you need to restrain a little better. I know when, again, Bryan came in and helped me out when I was still at my previous employer, we identified a couple who they just weren't allowed to talk to the auditors. We finally came back to the realization that they were some of the smartest guys we had on the staff, but they just, anytime you put them in front of any authority figure, they just wilted or started talking way too much about things that didn't need to be brought up. Not that they were necessarily a violation or trying to hide anything. It was just going to open up a bunch of rabbit holes that by the time we ran it to ground was just going to cause a lot of headache for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Our staff, our support, the audit team, nobody was going to be happy by the time we were done. So we said, you know what? You just kind of sit your back bench. If we have a question, we'll ask you via chat. And you can only use chat. And also set it up to where, like, particularly our SIP 7 was a challenge. Our SIP 7 and PRC 5, because we had a big SME team. We said, all right, you are the point person on this. Every question goes through you. If you need something, then you will turn around and call on somebody else from our team. Which actually, I think the audit team was a little put off by that at first. But once they realized how much easier it made everybody's job and we weren't hiding anything, we were just trying to stay organized. It went pretty well. But those are things that came out of doing those interview prep sessions and that audit prep in general. Just figuring out who could do what.
Yeah. And yeah, having the right amount of people, in an audit. A lot of these interviews, obviously the last couple of years have been virtual, but as we go back to in person, you don't want the cast of Ben-Hur, in the audit room necessarily. It's really figuring out that balance of who's supposed to be there and who needs to be there and who needs to be ready 5,
Yeah, I sat in some in-person interviews last spring on an audit, one of the first ones back. And most of them were pretty good, but there were 1 or 2 where we probably had 2 to 4 too many people in there. Yeah. And I think some of the body language going at that point and people feeling that they needed to interject started to derail a bit. So those are things that when you do your tests and you do your prep, identify those pieces as well as how much is too much.
Mm-hmm.
Nick and Bryan, the last thing I wanted to ask you guys about was on evidence packages as well. Bryan, you kind of made mention of evidence in one of your answers a little bit earlier. If you can't, what I've had a lot of former auditors tell me is if you can't prove it, you didn't do it anyway. So, what words of wisdom would you give for folks on how to prepare your evidence and how to organize it?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics as well, besides the interview prep. But number one thing to think about in terms of evidence is a narrative is not evidence. A lot of folks want to craft these well-written narratives, whether it's in the RSAW or in some other form. It has a lot of explanation and context, but in and of itself is not evidence. So don't get caught in that trap. Understand the auditors are really drilling down to, proof that an event occurred. What does that evidence look like? So packaging that up with the end result in mind is, hey, we have I'll give you an example real quick is, we have a work ticket that is closed showing, a change occurred. Closure of that ticket, that's great. It's generated from a system. It's, automated in some cases, but also what other evidence, what other reports or, outputs from systems do you have to support what you're saying in this ticket, like this change occurred and it's done. Thinking about it in that context, it's not just enough to say, here's the end result. I always liken it to math class, in school is to get the answer is great, but this is show me your work. And that's the performance side of this, that a lot of people really get wound around the axle. They're like, hey, I provided you the answer, and it might be the right answer, no question about it, but you can't show how you got there, and really hope that how you got there aligns with your procedure. That's a big deal. If you can clearly demonstrate that and put all of that together in a cohesive story, and that's, again, one of our strong suits really is coming up with that cohesive story to explain here's how we got to the right answer. So that's a big part. Nick, you got thoughts?
I don't know how you went through all of that and you didn't drop your patented line on evidence. If you've ever sat in an interview with Bryan and the evidence isn't quite there, he will tell you, we're in Missouri. This is the show me state. Yep. Even when you're in Colorado or Wyoming or Montana,
no matter where Washington, you are, it is Missouri. You got to show me.
He will teleport you to Missouri. I'd also like to jump in and say the other piece that you said, that narrative isn't evidence. Oftentimes procedures aren't either. And that's another trap I see folks fall into is, we've got a great procedure around this. That's great. That is an excellent control. In some cases that is enough, but for most standards in our space, in the infrastructure space in general, even going beyond SIP, it's about the performance. What did you do? And what can you prove you did? Not what did you say you would do or how you would do it. What did you do? Again, coming back, that's what the evidence needs to really clearly get across. Then the other thing when you're prepping for an audit is to go through that evidence objectively. And that's honestly where I think we provide some of our biggest benefit is it's not our baby, generally speaking, when you bring in a consultant or a third-party reviewer. We're looking at it objectively like an auditor would. And we can look at it and say, okay, there's not enough information here for me to determine that you did this. Or, hey, you've got too much information. Let's scale this back. You're getting close to one of the terms we use on the audit team, dump trucking. You're just backing the truck up and dumping it all out and saying, go find it. For me as an auditor, that was the quickest way to make me start looking for a violation. If you dump truck me, I had to do extra work. We're not friends anymore. It's a bad day for everybody now. If I'm having a bad day, you're having a bad day. But that's where having that fresh set of eyes. One of the things I routinely saw in evidence as an auditor, and I still see it occasionally, is you just get so used to seeing it. It's kind of like the piece of trash you walk by every day. Eventually, you quit noticing it. Same thing, or whatever that is, or that the piece that it's totally benign to you because you see it every day. Whereas somebody comes in fresh and they go, what's that? Or they say, I don't have enough information here to pick this up and follow it. I know there's one utility from when I was an auditor. I'm pretty sure they created Nick Weber voodoo dolls after I came through. But I looked at it and said, this is great. This is 98% perfect. But I can't follow it because I don't know where to go to find this. And they hadn't documented it. It was honestly, it was the hardest violation I've ever had to look at. It was kind of the old, for want of a nail, a battle was lost. Because without the nail through the shoe, without the shoe, the horse wasn't able. Without the horse, the rider wasn't able to go to battle. One person made the difference. And that's really what this was. And it was grueling. And it still, there are times it still bothers me that I had to write it, but I had to, because if the uninformed person off the street who had a base of knowledge came in there and they didn't know that one piece of tribal knowledge, they couldn't follow it. So those are the things that when you really start looking at it, step back and say, okay, if I didn't do this job every day, is there enough here for me to understand how to do it or that it was done?
Sure.
And that's really probably the biggest issue I think we see in most audits when the regulators are there, even with mock audits. We get in there. We honestly believe in our heart of hearts, you did it right, but you got to show it. And if you can't show it, then the auditors have to write it up, because as one of our clients right now loves to remind me, everybody has a boss. The auditors have a boss. They have at the regions have NERC has FERC has Congress. Congress has voters. Everybody has a boss.
Very true. Well said.
Wonderful. Well, Nick and Bryan, thank you for your time on this Direct Connect, as adventurous as it was today. Thank you guys very much. You guys take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
If you would like to learn more about the Archer team and how we can protect you, visit our website and reach out with a phone call or an email. If you know of a topic or someone you think we should talk to on DirectConnect, please let us know in the comments below.